It was the kind of crisp, clear autumn night that promised perfect mischief, the kind where the scent of wood smoke mingled with dying leaves and cheap candy. A promise whispered on the wind to every child in Hollow Creek. October 31st, 1998. Halloween. For the families of Elmwood Drive, a street once synonymous with idyllic suburban life, it would forever mark the beginning of their worst nightmare, a nightmare that would stretch into a cruel, silent eternity, only to be shattered by a discovery far too close to home. I remember it vividly, the way certain memories etch themselves into your soul, sharp and unyielding. The street lights cast long, dancing shadows of bare tree branches onto the pavement, and the air buzzed with the excited squeals of children, their costumes a blur of vibrant colors under the intermittent glow of porch lights and the full harvest moon. Jack-o'-lanterns, carved with varying degrees of artistic talent, leered from every stoop, their flickering candlelight painting macabre grins onto the night, some welcoming, others just a touch menacing. Among the throng of pint-sized ghosts, superheroes and princesses was 8-year-old Lily Jensen. She was a tiny thing, even for her age, with a cascade of fiery red hair that seemed to catch every available speck of light, a wild, untamed flame against her pale skin. A smattering of freckles dusted across a perpetually curious nose gave her a mischievous air. That night she was a fairy, a sparkly, slightly disheveled vision in a too-big, hand-me-down lilac tutu that had seen better days, and flimsy plastic wings that kept getting caught on bushes as she navigated the suburban landscape. Her basket, a small, vibrant orange pumpkin-shaped pail, was already brimming with an impressive haul of treats, and her laughter, high and clear, was a familiar melody, a joyous counterpoint to the rustling leaves and distant car hum, to anyone who lived within earshot of the Jensen house. Her best friend, Sarah Miller, a year older and already a head taller, was a witch that year, complete with a pointy hat that kept slipping over her eyes and a broomstick clutched like a magical weapon. They were inseparable, these two, traversing Elmwood Drive with a fierce determination, knocking on doors with synchronized gusto. Their ritual was well practiced, hit every house, from old Mr. Henderson's, who always gave out full-size chocolate bars and delighted in predicting their future with riddles, to the new couple on the corner, the young, corporate types who still hadn't quite grasped the subtle art of Halloween generosity, offering handfuls of healthy snacks much to the children's disdain. Lily's parents, Mark and Emily Jensen, were at home, performing their annual duty of handing out candy. Mark, a quiet man with a kind smile and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he truly laughed, was meticulously sorting M&Ms into different bowls by color, a calming, repetitive task that grounded him. Emily, ever the social butterfly, her bright, quick wit a magnet for conversation, chatted animatedly with neighbors who dropped by, exchanging anecdotes about their children's costumes and the rising price of fun-sized Snickers. They had a loose curfew for Lily, be back by 9 p.m. It felt late for an 8-year-old perhaps, but Elmwood Drive was safe. Everyone knew everyone. Kids roamed free here, riding bikes, playing street hockey, their parents' watchful eyes a benevolent, distant presence. Or so they all believed in the comfortable bubble of their suburban normalcy. 9 p.m. came, then 9:15. The steady stream of trick-or-treaters began to thin, replaced by the occasional latecomer. Emily's bright smile began to falter, a tiny tremor in her usually confident voice as she bid a neighbor good night. Mark, ever observant, noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the way her gaze kept drifting to the front door. He started pacing, a slow, almost imperceptible circuit from the living room window to the kitchen, his hands unconsciously rubbing at the back of his neck. They called Sarah's house. "Oh, she's not here, Mrs. Jensen," Sarah's mom said, her voice laced with a confusion that would soon morph into cold dread. Sarah came home alone about 20 minutes ago, said she was tired. Panic, that cold, clenching fist, began to tighten its grip on the Jensens' hearts. They called Sarah back, Emily's voice now taut with barely suppressed fear. A small, trembling voice belonging to 9-year-old Sarah explained, her words tripping over themselves, that they had split up near the end of the street, just past the Maxwell's house. Lily wanted to go to Mrs. Gable's house again for one more piece of candy, Sarah recounted, her voice thick with nascent guilt. And I was tired, so I just went home. She said she'd be right behind me. Mrs. Gable, a sweet but slightly eccentric elderly woman who lived 3 houses down from the Jensens, just across the street, was known for her generous portions and her habit of giving out homemade fudge. Mark and Emily, abandoning their post, rushed out into the suddenly chilling night, their desperate calls of Lily, Lily, bug, ripping through the quiet, their voices cracking with each shout, raw with a terror that clawed at their throats. They checked Mrs. Gable's porch. No sign of Lily. Mrs. Gable herself, startled by their frantic knocking, her face a bewildered mask, confirmed she hadn't seen Lily since earlier in the evening when she had given her a small bag of candied apples. She remembered Lily's bright red hair and the slightly crooked fairy wings. The police were called. It was 10:17 p.m. The initial response was textbook, a carefully choreographed escalation of urgency. Patrol cars, their blue and red lights flashing an ominous, pulsating rhythm against the festive Halloween decorations, swarmed Elmwood Drive. Officers, their expressions grim, walked the route Lily would have taken, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their powerful beams dancing across discarded candy wrappers, a single child's dropped glove and fallen leaves. Canine units were deployed, their barks, sharp and urgent, echoing through the unnaturally quiet night, adding to the growing sense of foreboding. Neighbors, roused from their sleep by the sudden commotion and the intrusive glare of emergency lights, gathered on their porches, their faces etched with concern, some already pulling on jackets, instinctively joining the impromptu search, calling out Lily's name in unison, their voices thin and reedy against the vastness of the night. The first 24 hours of a missing persons case are critical, a race against the clock, a desperate scramble for any fragment of information that might lead to a breakthrough. The Jensens lived through an agonizing eternity, each passing minute stretching into an hour, each hour into a day. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting light outside and the deepening exhaustion etched onto every face. The initial hope, fueled by the sheer number of volunteers, uniformed officers, and concerned citizens, slowly began to wane, replaced by a cold, insidious dread. Missing posters of Lily's smiling face, that innocent, freckled face, her red hair a vibrant splash of color against the white paper, popped up everywhere, on lampposts, in shop windows, stapled to trees, a haunting reminder of a joyous life suddenly extinguished. Local news channels ran stories, her picture a haunting presence on every screen, her story becoming a whispered prayer in every household. The little fairy, lost in the night, had become a symbol of collective fear. The Hollow Creek Police Department, though small, was diligent. Detectives conducted extensive interviews, re-interviewing every child, every parent, every resident on Elmwood Drive. Sarah Miller, traumatized and riddled with guilt, recounted her last moments with Lily countless times, her small voice growing hoarse with repetition, the memory of their parting now a painful, indelible wound. Detectives meticulously cataloged residents' whereabouts on Halloween night, cross-referencing alibis, attempting to reconstruct the chaotic tapestry of the evening. No one saw anything suspicious. No strange cars, no unfamiliar faces. Just the usual flurry of trick-or-treaters and the innocent chaos of the holiday. The initial search extended beyond Elmwood Drive, fanning out into the surrounding woods, the nearby creek, abandoned buildings, every conceivable place a small child might wander or be taken. Nothing. No trace. Lily had simply vanished. A significant lead, though seemingly minor at the time, emerged early in the investigation. A small plastic fairy wing, identical to one Lily was wearing, was found caught in a thorny rose bush in the front yard of the house directly across the street from Mrs. Gable's, the house belonging to the Maxwell family. Robert and Carol Maxwell, a seemingly normal, unassuming couple in their late 30s with two teenage sons, John, 16, and David, 15, were well known in the community. Robert was a respected local accountant, meticulous and quiet. Carol was a dedicated stay-at-home mom known for her pristine garden and her involvement in the PTA. They had participated in the trick-or-treating earlier that evening, handing out candy, just like everyone else. The discovery of the wing intensified the focus on the Maxwell property. Forensic teams, meticulously trained and equipped, swarmed their front yard, carefully sifting through every blade of grass, every fallen leaf, every petal of the roses. The house itself was searched, with the Maxwells' reluctant but outwardly cooperative permission. Nothing. No other trace of Lily. The wing was carefully packaged, sent for DNA testing, and confirmed to be Lily's. It was a fragment of a clue, enough to suggest a struggle, a brief pause, or a moment of chaos, but not enough to point to a culprit or a location. Without other supporting evidence, it remained an isolated, perplexing detail. The investigation, for all its intensity, began to stagnate. The police continued their work for months, then years. The Lily Jensen case became a cold case file. A thick, meticulously organized binder of reports, interviews, photographs, and forensic analyses, gathering dust in the archives of the Hollow Creek Police Department. Detective Miller, then a rookie, had been assigned to the case, his youthful enthusiasm gradually replaced by a grim determination. He swore he would never forget Lily's face. The Jensens' lives were irrevocably shattered. Emily, once so vibrant, her laugh infectious, became a shadow of her former self, perpetually wearing the haunted expression of a mother who had lost her child, a living embodiment of grief. Mark, his quiet nature deepening into a profound silence, retreated into himself, finding solace only in the methodical, solitary work of tending their garden. Their house, once filled with the echoes of Lily's laughter and the playful chaos of childhood, was now steeped in a palpable grief, a permanent testament to absence. Halloween, once a joyful tradition, became a day of mourning, a cruel annual anniversary, a scar on the calendar. They never moved, a silent act of faith, hoping that one day Lily might find her way home. Elmwood Drive changed too. The once bustling street quieted down. The children still played, but with a cautiousness that belied their years. Neighbors, once so trusting, eyed each other with a new, uncomfortable suspicion. Who could have done this? Was it a stranger, a predator who had slipped through the cracks of their tight-knit community? Or, far more terrifying, was it someone they knew, someone who still walked among them, a wolf in sheep's clothing? The sense of community, once so strong, fractured into cautious isolation. Children were no longer allowed to trick or treat alone. The carefree innocence of Hollow Creek, once its defining characteristic, was gone, replaced by a pervasive anxiety, a lingering chill that no amount of summer sun could dispel. 15 years passed. The calendar pages turned, years melting into a decade and a half. Lily Jensen would have been 23 years old, a young woman embarking on her own life, perhaps college, a career, a love story. Her missing person posters, faded and tattered by time and weather, were still occasionally seen, taped to community notice boards, a poignant reminder of a lingering pain, a ghost in the collective memory of the town. The case was brought up periodically by local journalists, especially around Halloween, a painful reopening of old wounds for the Jensens, but no new information ever surfaced. The leads had long since dried up, the trail cold as the grave. Detective Miller, now a seasoned veteran, still kept Lily's file on his desk, a silent promise, a constant ache. Then came the summer of 2013. A brutal, relentless heat wave had settled over Hollow Creek, baking the ground, wilting gardens, and pushing temperatures into the triple digits for days on end. The Maxwells, now empty nesters with John and David, long grown and moved away to pursue their own lives, had decided to undertake a major landscaping project in their backyard. The old, overgrown oak tree at the very back of their property, a majestic but neglected sentinel that had stood for decades, was finally going to get some attention. Robert Maxwell, a man in his late 50s, his hair thinning and his shoulders rounded by years at a desk, was digging a new, ambitious flower bed near the base of the ancient tree, a spot rarely disturbed over the years. The soil there was surprisingly stubborn, a mixture of clay and compacted earth, tangled with a dense network of ancient roots. He was grunting with effort, trying to dislodge a particularly large gnarled root that resisted his efforts like granite when his shovel struck something hard, something that wasn't rock. It felt metallic, then oddly soft beneath the thin layer of soil. He scraped away more dirt, curious, his brow furrowed with the effort and the heat. It felt hollow. He knelt down, brushing away the earth with his hands, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps in the oppressive heat. What he uncovered made his blood run cold, a chilling contrast to the searing summer day. It was a small plastic pumpkin-shaped pail. Its vibrant orange plastic was brittle and faded, streaked with mud and time, but unmistakable. The iconic wide-eyed jack-o'-lantern grin was still visible, albeit distorted, and nestled inside among the remnants of what looked like decaying chocolate and sticky, hardened candies was a tiny skeletal hand, its fragile bones a stark white against the dark earth. Robert Maxwell staggered backward, a choked gasp escaping his lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. He fell to his knees, not from exhaustion, but from the sudden, profound shock that buckled his legs. He scrambled for his phone, his fingers trembling so violently he could barely dial 911. His vision blurred, the familiar patterns of his backyard suddenly twisting into something grotesque and alien. The call came into the Hollow Creek Police Department at 3:47 p.m. on July 14, 2013. "We found a body," Robert Maxwell choked out, his voice thin, reedy, and barely audible, riddled with terror. "In my backyard. It's a child. Oh God, it's a child." Within minutes, the Maxwell residence was a scene of controlled chaos, a terrifying déjà vu for some. Police cars, forensics vans, and crime scene tape once again descended upon Elmwood Drive, but this time, the flashing blue and red lights held a grim finality, a stark punctuation mark on 15 years of agonizing uncertainty. Detective Miller, now a seasoned, grizzled veteran, his face perpetually etched with weariness, who had been a rookie on Lily's original case, was now leading the investigation. His usually stoic expression was a mask of grim resolve, a renewed purpose burning in his eyes. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was it. The excavation was painstaking, a slow, methodical uncovering of a long-buried truth. The area around the oak tree was meticulously cordoned off, every potential entry point secured. Forensic anthropologists were called in, along with a team of archaeologists from the nearby state university, experts in careful, precise recovery. Every inch of soil was carefully removed, layer by layer, sifted through fine mesh screens, and examined under portable lights. The discovery confirmed everyone's worst fears, fears that had lived in the collective subconscious of Hollow Creek for a decade and a half. Buried shallowly beneath the old oak tree, barely 3 feet deep, wrapped in a faded child-sized lilac fairy costume, were the skeletal remains of a small girl. Her fiery red hair, remarkably preserved in the clay-rich soil, still held a faint, rusty hue, a ghost of its former vibrancy. The flimsy plastic fairy wings, broken and fragile, lay beside her, a testament to her last joyful night. And that pumpkin pail, the one Robert Maxwell had found, its bright orange now muted by time and earth, was the exact same model Lily Jensen had carried 15 years ago. The identification was swift and heartbreaking. Dental records, meticulously preserved from Lily's childhood checkups, confirmed it. It was Lily Jensen, finally. After 15 long, agonizing years, Lily had come home, not to the welcoming embrace of her family, but to the cold, hard reality of a shallow, clandestine grave, just steps from her childhood home. The Jensens, notified by Detective Miller in person, collapsed into each other's arms, their grief a fresh, overwhelming wave, but mixed with a profound, aching relief that the agonizing uncertainty was finally over. The immediate focus of the investigation shifted, with an intense, laser-like precision, to the Maxwell family. Robert and Carol, visibly distraught and cooperative, were questioned again. Their original alibis from Halloween 1998 scrutinized with renewed intensity, every detail picked apart. Their sons, John and David, now adults in their early 30s, living in different states and pursuing their own careers, were immediately contacted and asked to come back to Hollow Creek for questioning. Robert Maxwell, pale and shaken to his core, reiterated his original story from 1998. He and Carol had been home all evening, handing out candy, answering the door dozens of times. Their sons, John and David, were also at home, ostensibly playing video games in the basement, occasionally helping with candy distribution when the doorbell rang in quick succession. They swore with every fiber of their being. They had no idea. How could a child be buried in their backyard without their knowledge, without them ever noticing a disturbed patch of earth or a suspicious act? The idea was inconceivable to them. The crime scene itself began to yield critical, if subtle, clues. The manner of burial indicated a hurried, clandestine act, born of panic and desperation, not elaborate planning. There was no elaborate preparation, no concrete slab, no heavy rocks or coverings to permanently conceal the grave. Just a shallow hole, quickly dug, hastily covered with earth, disguised by a few fallen leaves and the encroaching undergrowth of the old oak tree. This suggested an impulsive act, a sudden death followed by a frantic attempt at concealment, rather than a premeditated murder and carefully planned disposal. The autopsy on Lily's remains, though challenging due to the advanced decomposition, was meticulously performed by a renowned forensic pathologist. She determined the cause of death. There were distinct, identifiable fractures to the base of her skull, consistent with blunt force trauma. This wasn't an accidental fall. This was murder, and the weapon, though never found, was likely something small but heavy, wielded with significant, perhaps panicked, force. The lack of other defensive wounds suggested the blow was sudden and incapacitating. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence, however, was found not on Lily's remains, but in the disturbed soil around her. Forensic botanists brought in from the State University painstakingly examined the soil layers and the delicate root systems intertwined with the remains. They found microscopic fragments of a very specific type of ornamental shrub, one that was not naturally growing in the Maxwells' backyard, but was known to be planted in only a few yards on Elmwood Drive, including the Jensens' own front yard. More importantly, they found tiny, barely visible fragments of a unique speckled clay, almost iridescent in its composition. This specific clay wasn't native to the Maxwell property, nor was it common in Hollow Creek. This was a major breakthrough, a thread that could potentially unravel the entire mystery. It strongly suggested that whoever buried Lily might have tracked that specific clay from another location, bringing it with them, or that Lily herself had been in contact with that clay just prior to her death. The police immediately began to re-examine all of their 1998 evidence, going back through every interview, every photograph, every environmental sample, looking for any mention of unique soil or garden features. Detective Miller, with his long institutional memory and a personal connection to the cold case, remembered a specific detail from Sarah Miller's original interview from 1998. Sarah had mentioned that Lily, just before they split up near the end of the street, had tripped and fallen near old Mr. Henderson's prize-winning rose bushes, just 2 houses down from the Maxwells, on the same side of the street as the Jensens. Mr. Henderson was known for his meticulously kept, often unusual, garden and eccentric array of rare plants and custom-made garden decor. The investigative team immediately turned their attention to Mr. Henderson's property. Old Mr. Henderson had passed away peacefully a few years after Lily's disappearance, and his house had since been sold to a young family. But historical photos, property records, and the original police reports from 1998 contained detailed descriptions and pictures of his unique garden. And there it was, a specific section of his front flower bed, near the sidewalk where trick-or-treaters often walked, that contained a distinctive, brightly speckled clay, used to enhance the color of certain exotic flowers. And, yes, he had those specific ornamental shrubs, the same species whose fragments were found in the Maxwells' yard. This was the crucial link, a tangible physical connection. If Lily had indeed fallen there, as Sarah described, she might have picked up some of that distinctive clay on her clothes, her shoes, or even on her pumpkin pail. But how did that clay and Lily end up at the Maxwells' house, buried in their backyard? The investigation began to focus on the precise trajectory of Lily's last known movements. She wanted to go to Mrs. Gable's, 3 houses down, across the street. But the fairy wing was found in the Maxwells' front yard, which was across the street from Mrs. Gable's, and 2 houses down from the Hendersons where she had supposedly fallen. It was a convoluted, illogical path if she was simply heading directly to Mrs. Gable's for one more piece of candy. Why would she cross the street, then walk 2 houses away from her destination, and end up in the Maxwells' front yard? The police reviewed the Maxwells' original statements again, this time with a far more skeptical eye. Robert and Carol were home. Their sons were home. But what about their sons' activities that evening? John Maxwell, then 16, and David Maxwell, then 15, had a small, tight-knit group of friends they regularly hung out with, mostly fellow high school students. Their alibis, while seemingly innocuous in 1998, suddenly took on a new significance. One of David Maxwell's closest friends in 1998 was a boy named Kevin Davis. Kevin had moved out of Hollow Creek shortly after Lily's disappearance, his family relocating to a different state, and he rarely returned. He had been interviewed briefly in 1998, but as a minor, a secondary acquaintance, and with no direct connection to Lily, he hadn't been a primary focus. He was just one of many teenagers vaguely accounted for. Detective Miller, trusting his gut instinct and the faint, unsettling memories of David Maxwell's slightly aloof demeanor during the original questioning, decided to re-interview Kevin Davis, now in his early 30s, a seemingly successful professional living in Portland, Oregon. He flew out to meet him, a quiet, unassuming visit that was anything but. Kevin, initially cooperative, politely answering questions about his current life, became visibly uncomfortable and fidgety when the conversation, with deliberate precision, turned to Halloween 1998 and the Maxwell house. His eyes darted around the coffee shop, avoiding Miller's steady gaze. Under persistent, yet empathetic, questioning, Miller had learned over the years that brute force rarely worked as well as a patient, probing approach. Kevin eventually broke down. He hadn't been at the Maxwell's house that night, as David had claimed to police and to his parents. He had been at his own house, sick with a bad cold, watching movies. He had an ironclad alibi, one his parents had confirmed in 1998. He had lied for David. And then he confessed what he had heard, something he'd kept secret, a terrible, corrosive burden, out of a profound fear of his friend and the crushing weight of complicity. He confessed that a few weeks after Lily went missing, David Maxwell had confided in him. David was agitated, withdrawn, acting strangely, haunted by something unspoken. He'd mentioned getting into a stupid argument with some annoying little kids on Halloween night, frustrated by their persistence. He never specifically named Lily, but the timeline was right, the context unmistakable. He said he had been angry, yelling at them to leave him alone, to go home. Then, one night, months later, when he was extremely drunk, consumed by guilt and terror, David blurted out something horrific, words that had echoed in Kevin's mind for 15 years. "I didn't mean to. She just wouldn't stop crying. I just wanted her to be quiet. I just wanted her to be quiet." And he'd mentioned a shovel, the heavy thud of earth, the absolute darkness of the backyard. This was the missing piece. A potential motive, a moment of youthful anger, exacerbated by a stubborn child, escalating into an uncontrolled, tragic act that spun wildly out of control, followed by a desperate, panicked attempt to cover it up, burying not only a body but a terrible secret. Armed with Kevin Davis's confession and the mounting forensic evidence, the police obtained an arrest warrant for David Maxwell. He was living in Seattle, Washington, working as a successful software engineer, building a seemingly normal, prosperous life, far from the shadows of Hollow Creek. When confronted by Seattle detectives acting on behalf of Hollow Creek PD with Kevin's explicit statement and the irrefutable forensic evidence linking Lily's remains to his parents' backyard, David initially maintained his innocence, his calm, logical demeanor a stark contrast to the gravity of the accusations. But the pressure was immense, the walls closing in. The careful facade he had built over 15 years began to crack. Finally, after hours of intense yet methodical interrogation, David Maxwell confessed. His confession was a chilling, mundane account of a horror that had haunted him for 15 years, eroding his soul from within. On Halloween night 1998, David, then 15, was tired of handing out candy. He had been assigned the task by his parents, who had gone inside for a moment, leaving him on the porch, eager to return to his video game. Lily Jensen, fueled by sugar, the thrill of the night, and a child's relentless desire, decided she wanted just one more piece of candy from the Maxwells after visiting Mrs. Gable. She had already been to their house earlier in the evening. David, irritable, annoyed by her persistence, and wanting to get back to his solitary entertainment, snapped at her. "Go home, kid! We're done! We're out of candy!" he remembered yelling, his voice harsh. Lily, a stubborn streak in her, didn't like being dismissed, especially by an older boy. She started to argue, her small voice rising in frustration, then to cry, hot tears streaming down her freckled face. She was already upset, having apparently taken a tumble earlier at Mr. Henderson's, getting some mud on her fairy costume and scraping her knee, which now stung. Her persistent crying, coupled with David's agitated teenage frustration, pushed him over the edge. In a moment of uncontrolled, furious rage, he picked up a small ornamental garden gnome from the porch. It was heavy, solid ceramic, a kitschy garden decoration. He swung it, intending to scare her, to make her stop, to make her quiet. But he misjudged, or his anger was too great, too blinding. The gnome struck Lily on the back of her head with a sickening thud he would never forget. She crumpled instantly, a tiny, broken heap on the porch. The pumpkin pail rolled away, spilling candy across the floorboards. David, horrified, a cold, terrifying clarity cutting through his rage, realized what he had done. He was alone. His parents were inside, their laughter faintly audible. He checked for a pulse. There was none. He was a teenager, terrified, facing a reality too monstrous to comprehend. His mind raced, not with grief, but with sheer animalistic terror of the consequences of what his parents, the police, the world would do to him. He looked around frantically. No one was on the street. It was late, past the main rush of trick-or-treaters. He dragged her small, limp body into the shadows of their backyard, behind the old oak tree, a dense, overgrown area rarely visited. His parents were still inside, engrossed in their own activities, oblivious. He found a small, rusted garden shovel near the shed, left out by his father. In a desperate, adrenaline-fueled frenzy, he dug a shallow grave, barely deep enough to cover her. He dumped her in, covering her with dirt, then threw the shovel into the dense bushes, where it was eventually swallowed by the undergrowth and forgotten. He remembered Lily's fairy wing had come off and lay in their front yard, but he couldn't go back to get it without risking discovery. He simply left it there, hoping it would go unnoticed or be dismissed as a random piece of litter, a casualty of the Halloween chaos. He ran back into the house, heart pounding, trying to act normal, to blend back into the mundane reality of his evening. His parents never noticed anything amiss. The terror of discovery, he said, had been a constant, suffocating companion for 15 years. Every time the news mentioned Lily, every time a police car drove by, every time his parents mentioned doing yard work near the oak tree, he felt a cold, visceral dread. He had kept his secret buried deeper than Lily, beneath layers of guilt, fear, and a desperate, meticulous attempt to construct a normal, successful life, to escape the shadow of that Halloween night. David Maxwell was arrested and charged with the murder of Lily Jensen. The news sent shockwaves through Hollow Creek, not just for the profound resolution of the case, but for the shocking identity of the killer. It wasn't a stranger, a faceless monster from outside. It was the neighbor's son, a boy who grew up down the street, who had lived a seemingly normal, unremarkable life for 15 years, all while harboring this horrific, unspeakable secret just yards from where Lily's parents mourned. The trial was a painful, agonizing ordeal for the Jensens, a reopening of wounds they thought might never heal, but also a source of a grim, hard-won closure. Emily Jensen, her face now deeply lined with years of sorrow and the weight of waiting, sat through every single day, her gaze unwavering, watching the man who had stolen her daughter's future, a future she would never know. Mark, still quiet, held her hand, his strength a silent anchor. Finally, After all these years, knowing what had happened to their little fairy, David Maxwell's defense argued for manslaughter, citing his age and extreme panic, an impulsive act rather than premeditated murder. But the jury, after deliberating for days, was ultimately swayed by the cold, calculated act of concealment for so long, the deliberate choice to bury a child and then live a lie for 15 years. He was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, a fate he had narrowly escaped for a decade and a half, but one that finally caught up to him. The story of Lily Jensen is a stark, chilling reminder of the fragile line between innocence and tragedy, the delicate fabric of trust in a community. Halloween, a night of magic and make-believe, became a night of unspeakable horror, a dark stain on the memory of Hollow Creek. For 15 years, the truth lay buried, a silent testament to a life stolen and a family devastated by absence. The discovery in the Maxwells' backyard wasn't just the finding of a body. It was the unearthing of a truth that Hollow Creek had long despaired of ever finding. It shattered the illusion of safety, leaving behind a chilling legacy of a child lost and a killer revealed, all too close to home. The scent of wood smoke still drifts over Elmwood Drive in autumn, and the smell of dying leaves still mingles with the crisp air, but the carefree innocence of Halloween, for those who remember Lily Jensen, is a memory that can never be truly reclaimed, forever tainted by the secret that lay hidden beneath the old oak tree.